Hello, knowledge seekers. In this episode of 20-Minute Books, we delve into Stop Reading the News by Rolf Dobelli. Published in 2020, this provocative book explores the concept of leading a calmer, healthier, and more reflective life through a radical step: ceasing to consume news media. Dobelli argues that by avoiding the constant barrage of news, we can reclaim our mental space and focus on what truly matters. Rolf Dobelli, a Swiss author and entrepreneur born in 1966, started his career as a novelist before becoming acclaimed for his non-fiction works, including the bestseller The Art of Thinking Clearly. In addition to his writing, Dobelli co-founded Get Abstract, a company dedicated to summarizing books and articles, enhancing our understanding of complex topics quickly and efficiently. Stop Reading the News is especially relevant for those who feel overwhelmed by the incessant flow of news and wish to escape this cycle. It's also of great interest to potential long-form journalists and individuals curious about the impact of technology on our consumption habits and mental health. Join us as we explore how stepping back from news consumption can lead to a more thoughtful and focused existence. Stop Reading the News: How to Cope with the Information Overload and Think More Clearly. Introduction. What do you really gain from quitting the news cycle? Imagine this routine: alarm clocks beep, hands fumble for the phone, and eyes half shut scroll through an endless barrage of headlines. As the day unfolds, so does the habit of checking updates, each one often grimmer than the last, chipping away at your peace of mind and focus. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? This is the reality for many, caught in the grip of what can only be described as a news addiction. It's a cycle that's hard to break, where the urge to stay updated seems indispensable despite its apparent toll on our mental and physical well-being. Why cling to something that brings you more anxiety than insight? What if you could break free from this chain, regain your clarity and focus, and reclaim your day? It's time to consider the unthinkable: quitting the news. In this exploration, you'll uncover the subtle yet profound ways the endless stream of news reshapes your brain. You'll delve into the need to define your circle of competence, a range of topics that are not only relevant to your life but also within your direct influence. And importantly, you'll understand how the news exploits negativity bias, ensuring that fear frequently headlines, compelling you to come back for more. By stepping back from the news, you stand to regain not just time, but your sense of well-being and perspective. Such a step might be just what you need to lead a calmer, more focused life. Part 1. How a lifelong news obsession ultimately led to a crucial revelation. In today's interconnected world, the barrage of news is relentless and inescapable, from pulsing alerts on our smartphones to casual conversations sparked by the latest headline. This omnipresent flow of information can be overwhelming, as the author, Rolf Dobelli, discovered through his own exhaustive journey with news consumption. From his childhood in the quaint town of Lucerne, Switzerland, during the 70s, Dobelli's day began and ended with the news. His mornings were greeted by the crisp sound of the paperboy's deliveries and the radio's morning broadcast, and his evenings were capped off with the TV's nightly newsreel. But this routine was just the tip of the iceberg for a young Dobelli, who found himself seduced by the breadth and variety of global events relayed through these mediums. By 17, his fascination had deepened into a full-blown addiction. Every Saturday, Dobelli escaped to the local library's reading room, immersing himself in a sea of newspapers alongside the seasoned regulars. He admired their worldly demeanor, envisioning a future for himself steeped in sophisticated global discourse far removed from the mundane gossip of small-town life. This aspiration followed him into adulthood, where his job as a financial controller for Swiss Air allowed his news consumption to skyrocket further. Flights became opportunities to devour stacks of newspapers, and anything unread was swiftly tucked into his briefcase for later perusal. As digital technology evolved, Dobelli's fixation grew exponentially. His computer screensaver scrolled the latest headlines, while his inbox and notifications overflowed with updates from every conceivable source. However, a stark realization dawned on him one day when he noticed his diminishing capacity to engage with longer, more thoughtful pieces of writing. Books and in-depth articles became daunting, as his concentration waned after only a few paragraphs. Coupled with an increasing sense of anxiety, Dobelli recognized these as symptoms of severe information overload. At this critical juncture, he reflected deeply on his relentless news consumption. Had it enriched his wisdom or happiness? Did it enhance his clarity of thought? The answers to these questions were unequivocally negative, prompting a profound re-evaluation of his relationship with news. Part 2. From sensational tales to constant updates. The evolution of news as novelty. Try to think about a major news event from 5 years ago. Can you recount the details clearly? For most of us, even remembering the headlines from back then might be a struggle. The reality is, while those stories dominated the news cycle at the moment, their long-term impact or relevance to our daily lives was minimal at best. Why is this the case? It goes back to the very roots of journalism. Since the first newspapers hit the streets, the news has been driven primarily by novelty, often at the expense of relevance. When the first modern daily newspaper was printed in Leipzig, Germany back in 1650, the formula was simple. Captivate the public's attention with the most immediate and sensational stories of the day. From reports of public executions to the latest high society scandals, the criteria wasn't relevance but novelty, a phenomenon that grabbed and held the reader's attention long enough to sell copies. This trend has persisted and intensified over the centuries. Today, with the advent of digital media, the pressure for media outlets to attract viewers and generate clicks has led to an even greater emphasis on novelty. We live in an age of constant updates, where news is a 24/7 cycle, and media outlets compete not just to inform, but to startle and captivate. This dynamic is exacerbated by the proliferation of smartphones and social media, which keep us hooked on the latest developments, no matter how remote or irrelevant. We find ourselves consumed by the latest political scandal or celebrity gossip, all while more pertinent issues that directly affect our daily lives and well-being go unnoticed or unexamined. What's troubling is the effect this bias for novelty has not just on our understanding of the world, but on what news gets reported and how. Stories that might have a significant impact on our community or long-term public policy are overlooked in favor of whatever can generate immediate engagement. This shift not only distorts public perception, but fundamentally undermines the role of news as a tool for informed citizenship. Understanding the inherent bias for novelty in news can be a step toward consuming it more consciously, ensuring we are engaged citizens, not just passive receivers of the next flashy headline. In the subsequent analysis, we'll explore the implications of this constant news cycle on our cognitive functions and psychological health. Part 3. How excessive news consumption is reshaping our brains, and not for the better. Consider the marvel that is the human brain, a dynamic, ever-adaptable organ, continually rewiring itself based on the stimuli we encounter. It was once believed that our brains were static after reaching adulthood, but we now understand that they are highly malleable, influenced heavily by our daily activities and habits. An intriguing example comes from a study at University College London which observed London taxi drivers who must memorize the city's vast layout. These drivers exhibited a significantly larger hippocampus, the region of the brain vital for long-term memory, compared to bus drivers who follow fixed routes and don't require such extensive recall capabilities. This discrepancy underscores how specific tasks can fundamentally alter our brain structure. Now, apply this concept to habitual news consumption. If you're absorbing an incessant flow of news, your brain is constantly forming and reforming neural connections in response to this bombardment of information. Even when you aren't actively consuming news, these alterations in brain activity can have lingering effects, predominantly negative. Much like those taxi drivers enhancing their hippocampus, news consumers excessively develop certain parts of the brain at the expense of others. The modern news cycle promotes rapid shifts in attention from one headline to another, fostering neural pathways that accommodate multitasking and quick processing of new information at the cost of more profound, analytical thinking. Research from the University of Tokyo highlights a concerning trend. Excessive consumption of various media types correlates with a reduction in the anterior cingulate cortex, integral for maintaining attention and engaging in ethical judgments. This change suggests a shift from depth and morality in thinking to a preference for surface-level processing. The digital age, especially online news, encourages what Nicholas Carr, a researcher focused on the Internet's impact on cognition, describes as cursory reading, hurried and distracted thinking, and superficial learning. Consequently, the neural circuits that facilitate deep thinking and comprehensive reading begin to decline. You might recognize these symptoms in yourself, especially if you were once able to immerse in lengthy reading sessions or engage in thoughtful analysis. Now, you might find your attention wavering after only a few pages, or perhaps you feel an almost compulsive urge to check your phone. Michael Merzenich, a neuroscientist at the University of California, starkly sums up this phenomenon. We are training our brains to pay attention to crap. This statement not only captures the alarming direction of our cognitive evolution, but also serves as a call to critically evaluate and possibly curb our news consumption habits for the sake of our mental acuity and overall well-being. Part 4. The unhealthy impact of consuming too much negative news. Flip through any newspaper or browse a typical news website, and you will likely be greeted with a cascade of grim headlines. From reports of violent crimes to natural disasters, the prevalence of bad news is unmistakable. Rarely does a piece of uplifting news, like a significant legislative advancement that safeguards worker health, capture the spotlight with the same intensity. Why is bad news so dominant? It boils down to our very makeup as human beings. We evolved to prioritize bad news because, historically, those who were more attuned to danger were more likely to survive. This tendency is known as the negativity bias, a psychological phenomenon where negative events have a more substantial effect on one's psychological state than neutral or positive events. For instance, the distress caused by a financial downturn is typically twice as intense as the pleasure experienced from a similar gain. This inherent predisposition makes us perfect targets for news media, which capitalizes on our bias by predominantly featuring negative stories. This strategy isn't due to the media instilling this bias in us, but rather exploiting it to enhance consumption and engagement. The constant intake of such news isn't just a mental burden, it has tangible effects on our physical health. When confronted with stressful information, the brain triggers a release of adrenaline from the hypothalamus, which in turn increases cortisol levels in the bloodstream. While these hormonal changes prepare our bodies to face immediate threats in short bursts, their prolonged presence, a likely scenario with continuous exposure to stressful news, can suppress the immune system, disrupt digestion, impede growth, and increase the risk of chronic diseases. Moreover, the stress from regular engagement with negative news has been proven to be a significant issue, with studies by organizations like the American Psychological Association revealing that about half of adults suffer from news-related stress. This stress not only affects health, but also perpetuates a damaging cycle. High stress undermines willpower, making it tougher to disconnect from the news cycle, leading to increased consumption and, consequently, more stress. This cycle poses a challenge, making it hard to break free from the grip of news consumption and its adverse effects. A mindful approach to news intake might therefore be necessary, not just for mental clarity, but for maintaining physical health and overall well-being. Part 5. Why keeping up with disaster news doesn't translate to making a difference. Picture a catastrophic earthquake in a distant land. Buildings crumble, streets split open, and communities lie in ruins. Almost immediately, images of the devastation flood global media, capturing the world's attention. Headlines scream for attention, and updates roll out by the minute. In these moments, many of us become absorbed by the unfolding tragedy, refresh our feeds incessantly, and wait anxiously for news on what will happen next. It's a natural human reaction, an outpouring of concern and empathy for those caught in calamity. However, there's a painful truth behind this intense engagement. Merely following the news about such disasters does little to help those affected. While it might feel like staying informed shows solidarity and concern, the harsh reality is that our avid consumption of news does not facilitate any tangible change in the affected regions. Instead, it mainly benefits the media outlets and their advertisers, whose revenues swell as viewer engagement spikes. This cycle of consumption without contribution is not only ineffectual in aiding those in need, but also raises ethical questions about the nature of our engagement with tragedy. Are we simply spectators to others' suffering, watching from a safe distance while indulging in the drama and distress of far-off disasters? If you're genuinely looking to make a difference, consider redirecting the time spent on passive news consumption to more proactive efforts. Instead of incessant scrolling, perhaps extra hours at work could fund a donation to relief operations. Direct contributions to organizations equipped to provide on-the-ground assistance are far more impactful than any amount of news consumption. Furthermore, remember that many devastating issues fade from media attention not because they're resolved, but because they no longer attract viewers. Ongoing crises like the plight in Palestine or the famine in Yemen can disappear from headlines, yet continue unabated. Thus, if your goal is to truly aid in mitigating global suffering and contributing to positive changes, engage in meaningful actions beyond the digital realm. By shifting focus from passive observation to active involvement, you can extend your empathy beyond the screen and translate it into significant tangible support. Part 6. Embracing a complete break from news consumption for a healthier mindset. Having recognized the various detrimental effects of news addiction, from distraction and superficial thinking to physical stress and a false sense of empathy, it becomes crucial to explore effective ways to disengage from this consuming habit. One of the most effective strategies might just be the most straightforward: total disconnection from news media. The approach here is one of radical abstinence, as advocated by Dobelli. The premise is simple yet challenging. Commit to an initial period of 30 days without any news. This means no newspapers, no news websites, no radio snippets, and certainly no news notifications on your mobile devices. The first step involves a digital cleanse. Delete news apps from your phone, remove news websites from your bookmarks, and adjust your browser's homepage to something non-news related. Physically, stop purchasing newspapers and switch off the news broadcasts. Initially, this might feel like an overwhelming challenge. The temptation to check in on the latest headlines or listen in on news updates can be strong. Moreover, in social situations, there might be an initial fear of feeling out of the loop or unable to participate in conversations dominated by recent news topics. However, experience shows that really significant news tends to find its way to us through conversations and interactions without needing to seek it out. The idea is not to become uninformed, but to change the nature of the information we consume and the manner in which we consume it. By the end of the 30-day period, the goal is for you to notice a substantial shift in your mental state: greater calmness, enhanced clarity of thought, and an overall sense of well-being. Many find that after experiencing these benefits, the allure of returning to old news, consuming habits diminishes significantly. With the newfound time and mental space free from the constant noise of the news cycle, there's an opportunity to engage more deeply with the world through reading books, exploring long-form expert-written articles, or even starting new educational courses. This way, your understanding of the world becomes richer and more nuanced, rooted in in-depth knowledge rather than fleeting headlines. So, if you're ready for a mental detox that could redefine how you interact with the world, consider taking the bold step of cutting off news consumption completely, even if just as an experiment for 30 days. The benefits could be more profound than you anticipate. Part 7. Focus deeply. How eschewing the news enhances expertise. In the journey towards profound understanding and focused expertise, one key step involves streamlining where we direct our mental energy. When we decide to forego the habitual consumption of news, we free up cognitive resources to delve more deeply into topics that truly matter to our personal and professional growth. This action allows us to cultivate a more nuanced and profound awareness of the complex world around us, moving beyond the superficial and often fleeting snippets of information offered by the news. If we constantly scatter our attention across the diverse array of issues presented in the news, our knowledge remains shallow, and our focus spread too thinly. This is not just about fleeting distraction, it's about our capacity to achieve mastery in our chosen fields being significantly undermined by the incessant influx of largely irrelevant information. Consider the concept of the circle of competence, a term popularized by esteemed investor Warren Buffett. It refers to the specific areas where an individual holds deep expertise. Buffett, for example, excels in understanding the complexities of the stock market, and he consciously stays within this circle, avoiding ventures far outside his base of knowledge. The lesson here is clear. Stay within your circle of competence and give up the news. Engaging with the news pulls our attention into myriad directions, few of which intersect with our primary fields of expertise or personal growth. This isn't just unhelpful, it's counterproductive. The notion that one can juggle an understanding of global political intricacies while striving to excel, say, in quantum physics or creative writing, is fundamentally flawed. The great minds of history, Albert Einstein in theoretical physics, Frida Kahlo in painting, Beethoven in music, achieved their extraordinary capabilities not by diluting their focus, but by dedicating undivided attention to their crafts. They didn't indulge in constant news consumption. Instead, they immersed themselves in their work, exploring the depths of their creative and intellectual pursuits. Imagine a scenario where you must choose between two surgeons for a critical heart operation. One frequently checks the news between consultations. The other dedicates any spare moment to deepening their medical expertise. The choice is obvious. You'd opt for the surgeon whose focus is unwaveringly fixed on their specialty. Emulating the focused dedication of this second surgeon should be our goal. This approach doesn't just make us better at what we do, it makes us richer in knowledge and wisdom, capable of contributions that resonate deeply and last. Let us aspire to be individuals defined not by the breadth of news flashes that cross our screens, but by the depth of our understanding and the quality of our work. Part 8. Is abandoning daily news consumption detrimental to democratic engagement? Stepping away from daily news intake might raise concerns about staying informed and actively participating in democratic processes. Can one truly remain an engaged citizen without constant updates on current affairs? Historically, informed citizenry and democratic participation thrived even without the incessant influx of news we see today. Ancient Greeks, the pioneers of democracy, engaged in profound thought and lively debates to understand civic issues. Similarly, the intellectual architects of modern democracy, figures like Rousseau, Montesquieu, Hume, and Locke, didn't rely on a barrage of news, but rather on essays, debating societies, and philosophic discourse. This historical perspective brings us to a key realization. Cutting out the daily news does not necessarily harm democracy. A common counter-argument might be the necessity of news media to keep governmental and corporate power in check. Indeed, exposing truth is a cornerstone of a functioning democracy, but it is essential to differentiate between surface-level news consumption and in-depth journalism. Genuine journalism involves thorough investigation, comprehensive understanding, and thoughtful reporting, qualities necessary for holding power accountable. Consider the Watergate scandal, where investigative journalism by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein led to significant political repercussions, demonstrating the profound impact of diligent journalistic efforts. This form of journalism, which delves into the nuances of important issues, is far more beneficial for democracy than the fleeting headlines of daily news. Moreover, for those concerned about remaining updated without being overwhelmed by the relentless news cycle, there are alternatives. Publications like The Economist offer summarizations like The World This Week, providing key updates in a concise and measured format, allowing for engagement with current events without succumbing to information overload. Thus, stepping away from daily news doesn't mean withdrawing from informed discourse. On the contrary, it encourages deeper understanding and more meaningful engagement in democratic practices. Are you ready to embrace a more thoughtful approach to staying informed, one that respects both your time and intelligence? Final summary. The contemporary habit of consuming excessive news has several detrimental effects on both our minds and bodies. Here are the core insights. Firstly, incessant news consumption can negatively rewire the brain, promoting more distracted and superficial thinking patterns. As we navigate through constant streams of information, our ability to focus deeply and think critically diminishes. This change is partly due to the news media's tendency to focus on sensational and negative content, exploiting our innate negativity bias to capture and retain our attention. This leads to the second point. The predominance of negative news not only affects our mental state, but also our physical health. The stress induced by regular exposure to distressing content can trigger a cascade of physiological responses, including the release of adrenaline and cortisol. Over time, these stress hormones can weaken the immune system, making us more susceptible to illnesses and disrupting overall health. Furthermore, the passive consumption of news about global calamities and crises can create a sense of helplessness and desensitization, diminishing our active engagement in meaningful change. While keeping informed is important, there is a fine line between being aware and becoming overwhelmed. The proposed solution to mitigate these issues is quite radical but potentially transformative. Complete cessation of news consumption. By taking a decisive break from the news, deleting apps, avoiding news websites, and tuning out of news broadcasts, you can begin to regain control over your mental environment. This news detox can lead to increased clarity of thought, reduced anxiety, and a more balanced perspective on life's priorities. In essence, by breaking free from the endless cycle of news consumption, you open up space to engage more deeply with the world in a more thoughtful, informed, and calm manner. Are you ready to take this step towards a clearer, more deliberate way of living? Thank you for joining me today on this journey of learning and discovery as we explored the insights of another thought-provoking book in our growing library of knowledge. If you've enjoyed our time together, please take a moment to follow our podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and share 20-minute books with other knowledge seekers. Your support truly means a lot. Don't forget to join me again in the next episode, where we will delve into another enriching book. Until then, happy reading and happy listening.